Welcome back to this final part of Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about the Beltway Snipers, and by now you know their identities as Boyd Malvo and John Allen Muhammad. And in this part we're going to talk a little bit about the themes that were brought up at their trial, possible motives, and then how these two people came together and started rampage killing all over the DC area. So I'm joined again by Jayar Jackson, and I think it's best to just sort of jump in with the trial. We talked about when they were apprehended October 24th, 2002, and by November 10th, 2009, Muhammad would be executed by lethal injection. But in between then, there were two trials. There was one in Maryland, one in Virginia, because they crossed state lines with their killing. And the themes that were brought up at this trial, what was allowed to be introduced, what they were accused of, the motives that were thrown out from the prosecution, and sort of the defense from the defense, I think is really, really interesting with regards to this case. So one of them, one of the theories that I thought was a little bit interesting was terrorism, was basically domestic terrorism. And there was much made of the fact that Boyd Malvo drew drawings of Osama bin Laden when he was behind bars, Saddam Hussein, and that he had mentioned something about performing a jihad with these killings. But a lot of people have sort of thrown that out as a little bit of brainwashing from John Allen Muhammad. Now, from your research, do you think that there was some sort of a terrorist component to what they were doing?
There is, but I don't know if it was necessarily there.
If it was a methodical, planned out,
right.
A philosophy that they shared.
Right, because
I'm unsure of that
Muhammad was an army veteran, I believe, right?
Yeah.
You were saying, so that's where a lot of his training came from, his thought processes. Mentions of PTSD from whatever he experienced while he was serving. But then there's a less care about the way you kill people or how many people you have killed because maybe you've done it in war, so you're kind of desensitized to it. So there's a lot of factors that come in. So when you just, I don't know, maybe the legal definition for terrorism has to be certain things, but obviously it was terrorism for what it was. Just not sure if that was their original intent. Because also there's the crossings of him losing his children, Muhammad, and his ex-wife, and the revenge he was seeking from that, because then she came from Washington State and ended up taking off to try and get away from him. Right. And he's kind of hunting her down.
But what's interesting is that the judge threw out that as a motive. The prosecution was not allowed to present that to the jury because they just didn't feel like there was enough of a tie there. And I think absolutely there is some sort of a motive there. And his wife, his ex-wife, John Allen Muhammad's ex-wife, has spoken out publicly saying that she felt she was intended to be a victim. So just to outline that theory for you with regards to these killings, the theory is that John Allen Muhammad, he lost custody of his three kids, his three biological children, and his ex then they divorced, they separated. She changes her name and she moves from Washington State to Washington, D.C., and this absolutely ripped him apart. Being a father was very important to him. And he had planned to carry out these seemingly random killings across the DC area, and then she was going to be one of those killings to divert suspicion away from him. So if she was killed as just one of many people that were killed in the DC area, no one would look back at the disgruntled ex-husband who was looking to get custody of his children. So that was a motive that has been presented. That is what the ex-wife believes his intention was. She said that she saw the Chevy Caprice on her street, sort of camping out, very suspicious for a while around the time of the murders. So I think that there is definitely some truth to that. But I also think that there is some truth to what Malvo said. So in his first trial in Maryland, he says that he was the trigger guy, that Malvo, who was 17 at the time, was the guy that was shooting the gun, and that he was just taking the orders from John Allen Muhammad. And then he says in the trial in, I believe, 2006 in Virginia, that he was lying to protect Muhammad because he believed that Muhammad was his father figure, really the only father figure that Malvo had ever known. And so he says that he was lying to protect him, and in fact, they both were shooters, they both were complicit in this plan, and that Muhammad's plan was to, there was like 3 phases to it, and it's really strange and convoluted, as most murderous plots are. Muhammad's plan was to kill a bunch of people and then demand a bunch of money from the United States government, and then they would take that money and go to Canada, and on their way to Canada they would stop at YMCAs and they would stop at children's homes and recruit similarly vulnerable, impressionable young boys that would join their army, and then they'd go up to Canada and they would train, and then they'd come back to the US and sort of do another 9/11 I know, it sounds crazy, it should, but that is what Malvo said was the initial plan, which leads me back to terrorism.
Right.
And I think it's actually a combination of both. I think that Mohammed loved having this control over Malvo and having a subordinate, much like, you know, his days in the military. He loved having people to serve under him. And Malvo was a soldier serving under him to commit these crimes. And I think that he also wanted to kill his ex-wife and get his kids back. And I think he also wanted more Malvos in his life to just do his bidding.
It's also a combination. You know, there's another fascinating topic is about cult leaders and how they rise to power and how they manipulate certain minds, and they are always just seen like a father figure. It goes to the family. That's the family.
Yeah.
And you have this huge cult, and then they do whatever you tell them to do. It's more control over human beings, adults, adolescents, and kids. It doesn't matter. You control them all, and they do your bidding, and it all feeds to his mindset. So then, once you're obsessed with that, the downfall comes in forgetting how incredibly hard it is. That entire plan of then somehow killing damn near 20 people in the DC area, leaving taunting notes, and then demanding $10 million in a written letter to the government would actually get you that money. To think that means you're caught up with your own delusions of grandeur, that you have no idea that anyone's gonna not follow what you have to say, because everyone you've been and surrounded yourself with is following what you have to say. That plan is ridiculous. No way it would ever work. But
I also think, I know, and he says, call me God. I think another interesting theme with this story is his experience in the military. And his ex-wife says that he definitely was suffering from PTSD. And he served, he had hand-to-hand combat experience. He was a demolition expert. He served in Desert Storm. And she said that it was just about 3 months overseas that changed him, that he came back a completely different person, and they separated in 1999. And there's so much more to his life and his story that I think we can tie to how traumatic his experience was in the military and how that absolutely shaped his worldview. When he came back from serving in Desert Storm, he abducted his 3 children and went to Antigua, which is where he ended up meeting Boyd Malvo, who didn't have a father figure, and sort of came and joined his family. And here's another fucked up thing, Jayar, about John Allen Mohammed in life in general, is that he abducted his 3 kids, but because the divorce papers had not yet been finalized, had not yet been signed, he shared equal custody of the children. So even though his ex-wife Mildred went to the police, went to the FBI and said, my ex-husband, or my, you know, ostensibly like her husband at the time, stole my kids and left the country, they said there's nothing we can do about it. Because he has, you know, a legal right to those children as much as you do. That's her account of what happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure when these laws started being implemented, but I would assume they were around in 2002, because it's not like abducting your children was a new thing, even in 2002.
Sadly, I don't think it was a new thing.
Traveling now with a child is the not most complicated thing, but if you're gonna do it alone, if you're trying to cross the international lines, it's not gonna happen very easily. Doesn't matter, especially when they're younger, because I think the most common way kids are kidnapped is by an adult, a parent, or a family member.
Someone they know.
Yeah, like an aunt, uncle, father, mother. They take off with the kids. So you have to have all these papers. You cannot leave the country without driving or flying or by boat without papers that are notarized, signed by the other parent, telling you where you're going, how long you're gonna be there, who you're gonna be with while you're there, and when you're coming back, if and when you're coming back. So I don't know how any of that happened in the first place, or which weak lines
I also think, we are hearing what happened with the children and how they were abducted and the steps that Mildred carried out to try and regain custody of the children from her. So we're hearing one side of the story. I'm not saying that she's, falsifying anything of what happened, but we just have to remember that this is her account of what she did and what the authorities were telling her, because, like I said, John Al Muhammad was executed in 2009. And there's so many interesting components to this story. I definitely want to get into Boyd Malvo being a minor when the crimes were committed, but something I just wanted to point out that I thought was very strange about this as well is that apparently John Allen became very close friends with his lawyer, and they just worked tirelessly together on all his appeals. And he would say, you know, I love you, man. And they were just, they considered each other to be very close, almost brothers. I believe I saw an article where John Allen referred to his lawyer as like his brother in arms, and that they were working on this together. And it just makes me wonder about the relationship that a lawyer has with their client, even though John Allen is such a monster in how he just so callously and cold-blooded killed all these people, and how he had a plan and how it was orchestrated and how he carried it all out and outfitted his car to do it, so premeditated, and yet he had this bond with a lawyer that, you know, let's assume is not a monster. Right. That's so fascinating to me. That's the psychological aspect that makes me interested in this.
It goes back to wondering how people, the skills that someone can have to convince another adult who knows the state of mind of this particular attorney that was representing him, but to be able to convince that many people of your well-being and I guess your desire to do well for the community, no matter what you've already done. During all this time, if that attorney was maybe out and about and he's seeing all these murders happen and people are afraid to stand in one place, people were running across parking lots going to their cars. Yeah. They wanted to be mobile.
Gas stations were putting up tarps to shelter the people that were using the gas stations because people were being gunned down.
All of that, and you're an attorney, and then you find out this guy gets caught, and now you're representing him, and you become that tight with him that you're like, I forgot all about the fear and terror that I experienced during that time. You're my boy.
This is, well, see, we always talk about this in the part 3 of the show. Sometimes I think I'm empathetic to a fault, which is super conceited and pretentious to say.
I was going to ask you about Boyd after this.
But I wonder where is the line with forgiveness when it comes to something like this. I look at John Allen's story and I think that he was a very abusive, manipulative person. I also think that he was a very traumatized and deeply troubled person. True. I think that he was an underserved veteran who suffered from PTSD that was never dealt with. So I wonder, where's the line on compassion? I always wonder that when we get to part 3. And now let's talk about Lee Boyd Malvo. Jayar, he was 17 when he was committing these shootings, when he was complicit in all of these crimes. Does his age make him more forgivable? Does it exempt him from any sort of responsibility in these crimes?
No. But this is the thing, I'm one of those bleeding heart liberals too. That's like, well, it was a kid, you know. We have to take into account where he's coming from, what he's been through, his age. But our age range is always cut off at 18 because that's when legally you're considered an adult. But an 18-year-old who's a month into being 18 versus a 17-year-old who's 6 months from that 6 to 7 month difference, what does that really mean? Does that mean suddenly something clicked? I remember when I turned 18, I was the same kid when I was 17 and a half. You know, nothing that much changed except knowing, oh, I'm 18 now, about to graduate high school, and now don't do things that bad because you might actually get arrested.
Yeah.
So the reality of the situation just changes because of what we are told. But he was manipulated by someone who seemingly was manipulated and brain was put in a certain way. And also, as you said, underserved after probably dealing with something very traumatic. But at this point, you have to go to a lot of what the victims, families, and acquaintances feel. And also the community feels will be safe to have someone out in the community. And now, if he's dealing with these type of things, it's one of the things, my line is against death penalty versus life. So if this kid, now man, is gonna be in prison for life, 6 consecutive terms, there's a good chance to find out what happened. There's a good chance to rehab him, but he can't leave. That's the only thing. Sorry. Because there's going to be too many people that are too afraid of it, or maybe someone who's inspired by him then still getting away.
Well, let's talk about that. Malvo is appealing his life sentence, and I found a clip of this appeal. Let's take a look.
In a previous Washington Post article, Malvo was quoted as saying about Muhammad, quote, "He picked me because he knew he could mold me. It was a military mission. He told me to do something, and I did it." Now, Malvo's attorney is moving to have the life sentence thrown out, calling it illegal based on a 2016 U.S. Supreme Court decision that deems life sentences for juveniles unconstitutional. The 2016 ruling expanding on the court's decision in 2012 striking down mandatory life terms without parole for teens. The assistant attorney general in Virginia, among other lawyers in the state, arguing against the move by Malvo's attorney.
So that is in reference to the Supreme Court case Rope versus Simmons, which said that capital punishment is unconstitutional for minors. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm generally against capital punishment overall because we get it wrong. And also the fact you don't get a chance for someone to, it's a revenge thing. Let's keep it real. We're into capital punishment for revenge, and we're revengeful humans. That's what we are. But that I don't think should be carried out by the government. Our government should not be carrying out our revenge. And I talked to, maybe it's somewhat of an offshoot, but I had an interview years ago with a former NFL player, Warwick Dunn. His mother was murdered, and he went to visit the man that killed her on death row. It's down in Louisiana, and he said he had to sit and talk to him because that would help him. Because nothing was going to help him just knowing the guy died. He's like, yeah, well, my mom's gone too, and it still haunts me. So he had to sit and talk to him and make peace in his own brain. And you would think that's a thing where you go and you're like, oh, you're going to forgive this a-hole who did that to your mother? No, you need that for yourself. And we, I think, misinterpret killing off the person who did the horrific act as quelling our fears, our emotions, or our pain, and it's not going to do it. Maybe some people work for you, but I don't know those people.
I think that's an interesting thing to bring up because I know that there were families of the victims that attended the lethal injection of John Allen Muhammad. And it would be interesting, although absolutely intrusive to ask, if that healed them at all, if that helped them move on, not move on, but come to terms with their loss and just a heartbreaking loss. And again, 17 people lost their lives and 10 were injured. Lives were changed forever because of what they did. And I never know where exactly I fall on this, but I always try and be compassionate. I just think that Lee Boyd Malvo has, of course, a right to due process, and I think it's important that he sees all his appeals through, of course. But thinking of these families, this was a month. And this was almost the year, basically, from February to October of 2002, that people were living on edge, especially in the month of October. So if he, finds reform behind bars, then so be it.
Yeah, then at least maybe his brain is settled. But if you also think about the manner in which some of these people died, the woman at the Home Depot, I don't want to get too graphic, but apparently she was shot from behind. And the type of bullets used they're huge bullets. They enter normal size and they expand so as to, if you're hitting the torso, it just kind of tears up multiple organs. And she was hitting the head, so it destroyed her skull. And so if you think about the horrific nature of her death, which she probably didn't feel, but if you think about what maybe I think it was her boyfriend or husband had to deal with and seeing that and experiencing her, you don't want, the way that Muhammad was executed, the way we have to do it is sane, no pain involved. He's put to sleep. There's multiple injections in lethal injection. You put one in and it puts him to sleep. Then you administer the lethal dose. So he doesn't feel anything. He goes to sleep. So if you're watching that, you don't go, yeah, that asshole who blew my sister, my mother, my daughter's head apart, he went to sleep. I feel better now. I don't see where it solves it for you. Some people do maybe get revenge and then feel better, but that's probably at their own hands. If you're watching behind a glass window, if this guy go to sleep, I'm not sure how much that does it for you. Yeah. When he did something horrific to your family member.
All right, Jayar, final thoughts on this case, on this story. What are the overarching themes that you want our viewers to take away from this show today?
Don't follow the movie things, don't follow the Law and Orders, because I think they are inspiring some of these things. I sound like one of those congressman who wants to put limits on television and movies because it inspires crazy people. But man, just watch it and it looks real, but there's no need to carry this type of stuff out. It's one of those things that I'm a bit of a paranoid person. I watch everyone around me at all times.
Good to know.
All the times, take that away.
Good to know.
Do not approach me. I don't care where we are. I've been in many nice parts of the city and been like, I don't like where this guy's looking. I don't like his approach. I don't like what he's asking me. Are we about to fight? Do I have to kill him? So it's just one of those things you have to worry about because you never know who's the crazy one, who's going to go off. But to take away from this, just take care of each other because obviously Malvo was brought in, as he mentioned in his appeal. He's brought in by someone who manipulated his mind. Seemingly, Muhammad his brain was detached from whatever he experienced. So it's always a beginning of something that incidentally. There's no just directly evil people that were born evil. And I think we like to believe that to make ourselves feel better. But everyone's normal at first. Something is taught, something is neglected, brains are triggered, and people go on these types of things to fulfill those holes.
It's interesting. We've had sort of actually a converse conversation when we've talked about other serial killers, so it's interesting to hear your perspective on this specific case. But guys, we want to hear from you in the comments section below. Had you heard about the Beltway Snipers before? What should we talk about next? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and if you want some exclusive content, head over to tytnetwork.com/join. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Murder with Friends.